Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured, but the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Book 1 of On Duties, the work of Stoic ethics that he lays out, Cicero discusses the virtues and in particular the virtue of justice. One of the subdivisions of the virtue of justice is what he terms beneficence and in other places benevolence. This is a disposition of doing good to other people, going beyond the rules or what's required to do more than that, to help them out, to show generosity. Now, one of the questions that we can ask is, how much? Under what conditions? And one of the possible answers that some people give is, well, you should always give as much as you possibly can. You should always do. You should always help as much as you possibly can. That the more that you do of that, the better a person you are. Cicero doesn't take that position. He does think that we ought to go beyond just what, people's rights are or what the law says or what we've promised. We should do more than that, but we shouldn't go too far. And so this raises a very interesting question. Why do we need guidelines about how far we ought to go or who we ought to be generous or beneficent with? Why shouldn't we just simply say, whenever you see a person in need, help them out? Whenever anybody could be assisted in some way by your talents or your money or your social position, use those to help those people. Well, one of the problems that comes up is we only have so many resources, and some of those resources are almost impossible to add to. I mean, we can get more wealth and we can certainly develop more talents, but you cannot get yourself more time. And although you can train yourself to pay more attention, you can only pay attention to so many people at any given time. Are you depriving others by giving to those who you do help? Are you committing injustice in that way? Cicero would say no. You're actually being prudent and you're being just by doing so. We need guidelines to help us out in these sort of situations. Particularly the people who are most inclined to help other people out need these guidelines the most. The people who are kind of standoffish and stingy and not inclined to help people, well, they might need a little reminder to, you should do some charity work or some volunteering or give of yourself. Help your neighbor out. But the people who are always giving might go too far. So Cicero provides some very important guidelines here. The first of which, well, let's run through them in order. So they are, don't harm the person or other persons. This is the first one. He says the second one is, don't go beyond your means. Don't go beyond what you actually have or what you can sustain. Proportion your benevolence or beneficence to the merit of the person. And this actually covers quite a lot, as we'll see. Show proper gratitude. That's an obligation as well. And then exercise judgment and consideration when you are giving. Don't just give because it makes you feel good. Give because it's actually the right thing to do in this particular case. So let's look at each of these in turn. He says, there's many who transgress this first one, don't harm the person or other persons, because what they do is they take from one person to give to another. He uses as an example some of the people in Roman society who are robbing one person to enrich another. They expect to be thought generous to their friends if they put them in the way of getting rich, no matter by what means. Cicero says this is beyond the pale. This is so remote from moral duty, nothing can be more opposed to duty. So he talks about Sulla, and he also talks about Caesar, Gaius Caesar, how they took things from their rightful owners to give them to other people. They're not really being generous by doing that. They're being unjust. This is not a form of benevolence, even though those who are benefiting from it are probably inclined to look at it that way and to talk about it that way. But if you're harming other people in the process, you're not really being benevolent. You're not being good to people in general. We might also think about cases where you could, in fact, be harming the person with the attention, with the money, with the resources, with whatever it is that you're providing them with. For instance, if we think that we know better than them what it is that they really need or desire, and we don't take account of that, and we give them gifts that are unwelcome, those aren't really gifts. Those are really obstacles, or you might say irritations. What about other cases? Should we give an alcoholic a drink at the Christmas party? No, you shouldn't do that, right? Should you enable people in other ways? That's not really being good to them. It's not being generous to them. So it's important not to harm other people by the ways in which we're giving. He also talks about not going beyond our means. This is a very important thing as well. He says, those who wish to be more open-handed than circumstances allow of are guilty of two main faults. They're doing wrong to somebody else. They're not helping, they're harming somebody, namely those who are closest to them, their family, their friends, those who are dependent upon them. People who can't stop giving gifts to random strangers are going to exhaust their means and not be able to take care of those people who they ought to be most closely concerned with. We might say similar things about those who have nothing to give to their community because they've given it all to some other far distant cause. So there's that. He says, such generosity too often engenders a passion for plundering and misappropriating property in order to supply the means for making large gifts. He says a third thing as well, we may observe that many people do many things that seem to be inspired more from a spirit, he says, of ostentation than by heartfelt kindness. So there are some people who want to appear to be big shots, and they go beyond their means. If we do this, this is not good for us, and ultimately it's not good for those who we're giving to. Because, if they really do deserve it, wouldn't it be better if we do it in a sustainable way? And this could go not just for money, this could go for other resources like time. If you're committing too much so that you're not actually getting enough sleep, that's a problem. You do need to sleep in order to function well. If you're giving so much of your, we might say, emotional energy that you have none left for yourself, sooner or later you will collapse. And you're not going to be helping anybody else when they have to take care of you. So that's a real issue. This is an important guideline. The third one is quite complex, and we're only going to go into some of the things that Cicero says here about proportioning the beneficence or benevolence to the merit of the person. He says, in acts of kindness, we want to weigh with discrimination the worthiness, the value of the object of our benevolence. We should take into consideration the moral character of the person. We should be beneficent towards those who are actually honest, rather than to those who are dishonest. We should be beneficent towards those who themselves will show generosity or show clemency or mercy to other people, rather than to those who are hard-hearted, irritable, antagonistic. This is what Cicero would say. It doesn't mean that we can't show any to those who are much more disagreeable people, who make other people miserable, but it means that the people who aren't making other people miserable, they should probably get the first shot at what it is that we have to give. So there's one aspect of that. He also says we should take into consideration the attitude of the person towards us, the intimacy of their relations to us, and our common social ties. He says all of these, would be nice to combine into one person, but often that's not the case. So we may have somebody who's closer to us by, virtue of being our cousin, but they're not a particularly good person. And then we may have a person who's really great, but they're not as close to us. Which one should we give to? We want to proportion it in some way to that. He also has a very important reminder here for us. He says we don't want to set the standards so high that nobody can meet them. He says, this is a beautiful line, the people we live with are not perfect and ideally wise, but we would do very well if there were found in them but the, as he says, semblance of virtue, the simulacra virtutis. So he says, nobody's to be entirely neglected who shows any trace of virtue. We don't have to have people who are perfectly virtuous for us to be, doing the right thing and helping them out. If we see a tendency towards it, let's help them if we can. And those who are more willing to do that, those people do deserve our beneficence or benevolence more than those who say, screw it, I'm not going to have anything to do with that. One of the other things that he does talk about that I think is quite interesting is about gratitude. He says, there are those who've already shown beneficence or benevolence to us. Those people have a higher claim on our beneficence, our benevolence. If somebody's already given us a gift, we should try to repay that gift. If somebody has opened up opportunities for us, we should try to recompense them in some way. Probably we're not going to have the same kind of opportunities, especially if it's a asymmetrical relationship, somebody like a mentor, for example. We might think about this by paying it forward, as people say. It may be impossible to do entire gratitude or something entirely just towards that person, but we may act that way to somebody else as an object of our own beneficence. Cicero thinks that that's a very important criterion as well. The last point, very interesting, is that he says that we should exercise judgment and consideration. We shouldn't be acting impulsively. We should be acting with a clear mind, doing things because they're the right thing to do, not just because they make us feel good, not just because it touches at our heartstrings. As he says, people often do favors impulsively for everyone without discrimination. And he calls this a morbid type of benevolence. It's not really benevolence or beneficence. It's really something not good for them. And it's probably going to violate some of these things, going beyond their means, harming the person, not taking account of who the person is, perhaps not repaying benefactors who have helped us out. Instead, he says we should exercise judgment, deliberation, mature consideration. So these are some really helpful guidelines, I think, when we get into the sticky situations, because we're always going to be faced with questions of, well, should I give to this person in this way or give to this person in this way, because I can't actually do it all. Or if I give to these two, I can't help out these people over here. Some people beat themselves up over this. Cicero would say, so long as you're following these guidelines, you can actually tell yourself, quite truthfully, that you are, in fact, a just and beneficent or benevolent person.